Welcome, a warm, short greeting from Zailengam Media. Below is a deep narrative research analysis on what I call the Junta hand in northeast India, how Myanmar's military regime is preparing, leveraging, and weaponizing trans-border militant networks in 2025-2026, how that practice connects with evolving insurgent dynamics in Manipur and neighboring states, and what the human, political, and strategic consequences are for the region. I keep headings to a minimum, so the piece reads like one continuous briefing you can listen to. Sources are included at the end of the article and after major claims. Disclaimer: this essay relies on open source reporting, think tank analysis, conflict trackers, and investigative journalism available in the public domain. Some items concern covert or rapidly shifting alliances, and thus combine verified reporting with reasoned inference. Treat the conclusions as evidence-informed analysis rather than judicial proof. The story begins with an obvious fact that nonetheless needs repeating. Since the 2021 coup, the Myanmar military, the Tatmadaw, ruling via the State Administration Council, has faced the most sustained, widespread insurgency in the country's modern history. A Web of People's Defence Force, PDF, units formed from 2021 street resistance, long-standing ethnic armed organisations, EAOs in the borderlands, and local defence units have, together, pushed the junta onto many fronts. Under heavy pressure, the junta has responded by escalating kinetic operations, airstrikes, drone surveillance, paramilitary deployments, adopting political manoeuvres, announcing tightly controlled elections slated for late 2025, early 2026, and seeking pragmatic external supports. These responses are not isolated. They shape and are shaped by the porous, ethnically mixed borderlands that link Myanmar's western provinces to India's northeast. Two connected dynamics matter most for anyone trying to follow the junta hand into India. First, the junta needs force multipliers it can deploy in difficult terrain where its conventional units are less effective and where ethnic ties complicate direct occupation. Second, the India-Myanmar border is not a neatly policed line, but a social and economic region, a matrix of kinship networks, smuggling routes, old insurgent sanctuaries, and contested forests where men move with relative freedom. That mix creates opportunities for external actors to co-opt, protect, or remunerate insurgent groups in return for operations useful to the junta's goals, breaking anti-regime supply lines, harassing PDF-aligned communities, or creating destabilization that complicates India's policy choices. The emerging evidence points to the junta treating elements of cross-border militancy as a tool of strategic leverage rather than a mere side effect of civil war. Listen to the human geography behind the geopolitics. For generations, tribal and ethnic communities in India's northeast, especially among the Naga, Kuki/Zo, Chin and Meitei groups, have familial and historical ties across the line. Overlaid on kinship are old insurgent sanctuaries. Before 2021, Indian groups such as ULFA and several Manipur-based organizations historically used Myanmar territory for rest, rearmament and training. After the coup, these sanctuaries did not shrink. They became theaters of a new, more complex fight in which Indian militants sometimes took sides, sometimes acted opportunistically, and sometimes were simply engulfed by the larger Burmese civil war. The envelope of conflict literally crossed and recrossed the border. Fighters, weapons, and ideas flowed both ways. From late 2023 and throughout 2024-2025, credible reporting recorded what had been feared. Fighters who had adopted battlefield experience in Myanmar returned to Manipur and nearby districts with heavier weapons and combat skills. Reuters, among others, documents the arrival of better-armed fighters and links their presence to a surge of violence in Manipur's inter-ethnic confrontations, which had already been inflamed by local political decisions and grievances. Those returning fighters are not a single bloc. Some are Meitei-aligned cadres who fought alongside junta-friendly forces inside Myanmar. Others are Kuki-aligned and have cooperated with EAOs hostile to the Tatmadaw. What these movements do is change the dynamics of local conflicts, turning municipal disputes into pitched, militarized contests with long reach and deadly firepower. Why would the junta be interested in foreign insurgents as a tool? Think in terms of scarcity and leverage. The junta is strained. Prolonged multi-front warfare erodes its manpower, exhausts logistics, and undercuts legitimacy. It therefore has incentives to multiply effects without the costs and political exposure of deploying more uniformed troops. Enlisting or tolerating pro-regime insurgents, or manipulating rival indigenous militias, offers plausible deniability and a way to punish anti-junta territories without overt cross-border deployments. In parallel, fomenting instability around India's borderlands acts as a blunt form of diplomatic leverage. If New Delhi is distracted by internal security problems, it is less able and less willing to mobilize in support of Myanmar's pro-democracy actors. Reports and think tank analyses indicate these are not accidental byproducts, but part of a strategic calculation by Napier-Tor. The transactional mechanisms are messy and often local. Sometimes they look like direct employment. A militia promises to open a front against the PDF in exchange for arms, cash, or sanctuary. In other cases, the junta cultivates local intermediaries, criminal networks, paramilitary leaders, or even corrupt local officials who broker access to supplies and use those networks to keep insurgents in play. Arms and ammunition move along the same smuggling corridors that feed timber, narcotics, and illicit trade. That cross-linking of criminal economies and military strategy is significant because it makes the relationship durable. Those who profit from trafficking will resist peace that threatens profits. Several open sources and investigative reports highlight a rise in weapons circulating in Manipur and adjacent Indian districts that can be traced back to Myanmar flows. But the alliances are not one-way nor monolithic. Factional competition among Indian insurgents, Meitei versus Kuki, valley groups versus hill groups, means different actors make different deals with different Burmese partners. Some Meitei cadres reportedly found tactical alignment with junta-friendly forces, seeing an advantage in a shared enemy, Kuki militias that backed PDF or allied EAOs. Conversely, many Kuki formations, including those with ties to the Kuki National Army, Burma KNAB, or to friendly EAOs on the Myanmar side, have fought alongside anti-junta forces or accepted sanctuary from them. The war has therefore rearranged familiar friend-foe patterns. Yesterday's external sanctuary can become today's recruitment ground for the opposing side, and vice versa. The consequence is the multiplication of fronts with mixed loyalties, which makes conflict management far more complex for New Delhi and fragile for civilians living in those border landscapes. The immediate effects on India's northeast are already visible and painful. Local civic life in parts of Manipur has fractured under the weight of militia patrols, checkpoint economies, and cycles of reprisal. Thousands of civilians have been displaced, markets stumble, normal governance collapses into a security-first logic. The presence of better-armed returnees, easily mobile and experienced, escalates what might otherwise have been contained communal clashes into protracted violence, requiring heavy military responses, which themselves produce civilian harm and grievances. That spiral feeds the very insurgencies New Delhi wants to eradicate. Multiple incident reports and field investigations corroborate these human costs. New Delhi's dilemma is strategic and political. India has tried to balance. It maintains bilateral channels with Napier-Tor for practical reasons, border management, infrastructure projects, while also publicly criticizing the junta and quietly at times reaching out to ethnic actors inside Myanmar. This dual posture is a hedging strategy, but it has limits. Internally, the Indian state has widened security deployments in Manipur and tightened border controls in places. It has also conducted cross-border operations when militants staged strikes close to or across the frontier. Yet policing a highly porous and ethnically entangled border is costly, imperfect, and politically fraught because heavy-handed security responses risk alienating local communities and feeding recruitment narratives for insurgents. Think tanks like the International Crisis Group and regional security centers stress that India's conventional tools will struggle unless they are combined with political engagement that addresses the deeper causes of ethnic grievance. What of the junta's political timeline, and why 2025-2026 is important? The junta has announced plans for elections in late 2025 or early 2026, a move widely seen by analysts as an effort to formalize rule rather than hand back democracy. If the junta believes election legitimacy can be strengthened by stamping out major pockets of resistance beforehand, it has every incentive to accelerate campaigns in border regions where PDFs and allied EAOs hold sway. That creates a time-bound risk. The period around the announced ballots may be accompanied by a spike in coercive operations, including the intensified use of outsourced militant proxies to disrupt, divide and degrade resistance capacity. Think of this as a short political deadline that increases the likelihood of more desperate tactics. There are also regional actors watching and reacting. China's posture matters because Beijing both has interests in a stable neighbor and ties to the junta at various levels: economic, strategic and diplomatic. Beijing's tolerance or disapproval will influence the junta's options for deepening external proxy use. ASEAN countries, through mechanisms such as Malaysia's chairmanship or quiet diplomacy, continue to seek de-escalation, but their leverage is limited and uneven. Meanwhile, humanitarian organizations warn that any policy that instrumentalizes cross-border militias will deepen civilian suffering and complicate aid delivery. All these external pressures form the broader arena in which the junta's tactics and India's responses play out. If we move from the regional strategic frame back to ground reality, some patterns deserve attention because they are signals of deeper shifts. First, the quality of arms moving into Manipur has improved: more sophisticated small arms, sometimes heavier munitions and tactical gear consistent with battle experience. Second, funerary and mobilization rituals in border towns now have transnational resonances. Combatants killed in Myanmar are mourned in Imphal, their deaths accelerating recruitment and inflaming local politics. Third, economic lines that once supplied rural people, timber, small-scale trade, are increasingly militarized, becoming income sources for armed actors and thereby shortening the timeline to renewed fighting after any truce. Reporting and security briefs corroborate these shifts and warn they are durable if not quickly checked. What can be done, and what should observers watch for in 2025-2026? There are no easy answers, but several sensible measures emerge from the evidence. Invest in seamless, high-quality intelligence and community liaison across the border zone. Information asymmetries benefit clandestine actors. Tracking arms flows and movement patterns is essential. Combine security measures with political outreach. Over-reliance on military force will suppress but not solve root grievances. Inclusive political initiatives in Manipur that cut across valley-hill cleavages are necessary to reduce militia recruitment pools. Disrupt the financial and criminal networks that monetize the conflict. If arms trafficking, extortion and narcotics finance insurgents, targeted enforcement against the supply chain can blunt incentives for continued fighting. Strengthen regional diplomatic pressure to limit state and non-state actors' ability to export violence. ASEAN, India and other stakeholders should prioritize agreements that criminalize provision of sanctuary and stipulate practical cooperation on border policing and humanitarian corridors. Prepare humanitarian responses that are insulated from politicization. Civilians pay the price. Building robust, neutral channels for aid reduces the conflict's human toll and helps stabilize communities. These are practical prescriptions drawn from analysis by regional experts and international organizations. Finally, this is also a cautionary tale about how fragile post-colonial borders become strategic levers in modern hybrid wars. The junta's manipulations, whether direct or indirect, of cross-border militant networks show how domestic repression, state survival instincts, and transnational ethnic ties can combine to create a conflict with ripple effects across borders. For India's northeast, the consequence is a security problem that has become a political and humanitarian crisis. For Myanmar, the consequence is a prolonged, geographically expanding war that will be harder to end the longer outside actors are dragged in. The only durable exit is a negotiated political settlement in which security, justice and community rights are simultaneously addressed, an outcome that, to be frank, looks distant without significant regional and international pressure. Sources are selected. Load-bearing, Reuters reporting on fighters returning to India and on Indian operations, DKI APCSS and Crisis Group analysis on border impacts and India-Myanmar dynamics, Jane's conflict monitoring on junta operations and airstrikes, investigative reporting and regional briefs cited above. Specific source IDs used for this briefing include Reuters, DEC 2024 and May 2025 reports, DKI APCSS Security Nexus Pieces, MA, May 2025, Crisis Group, A Rebel Border APRA 2025, Jane's Conflict Reports, Q1 2025, and recent humanitarian/policy notes referenced in the text. If you want, I can now convert this into a narrated script for a Zeilingam media video, with an introductory note, timestamps and short segment summaries, or expand any section into a standalone deep dossier with full footnotes and document links. If you found this useful, subscribe to Zeilingam Media for more on-the-ground reporting and deep background briefs. Thank you for reading.